Hi, I'm Yolanda and this is Speak On. As part of our gender and identity series, we're talking about hormones and how they affect our lives. I'm joined by Amy Thomson, founder and CEO of leading women's health app and tech service, Moody, and author of the new book, Moody, a 21st Century Hormone Guide. An important thing for everyone to know is that Amy is a massive fan of hot cross buns, and that is why I like her so much. It's an important fact for everyone to know. Welcome, Amy. How are you doing?
Really good, thank you so much. And I have got an absolute fill of hot cross buns over the last month because I don't obviously live in the UK. So coming back I've just inundated every day. So it's been great.
Are you going to pack some in your suitcase to take home with you?
Yeah, like a crazy person. Yeah.
Just like
importing.
So actually, do you know what? A very important question to ask before we get into anything else. Are you a hot cross bun purist or do you like flavoured hot cross buns?
I would say I'm a bit of a purist, but not because I don't appreciate a flavoured hot cross bun, but I don't get a lot of them. And so I also, and this again feeds into what we're going to talk about in terms of what's good for your brain, body, is that I love the nostalgia of it. So the reason I love hot cross buns so much is they were so synonymous with, my mum used to make them at home, and then they're just the smell, everything reminds me of the UK. And so being that I don't live here, it's really nice coming back, and they're just such a sensory experience. So I go very traditional because I'm all about the nostalgia.
That's fair enough. But I'm a purist as well, because I'm like, you can't beat the real thing. It's like you can add all this other stuff into it, but I just don't think it's important.
I would say I agree. I concur.
Yeah. So how has the past kind of year been for you? I mean, you've got your book's been released. Obviously, you're managing your app, which I can only imagine is incredibly busy as well. How has everything been for you?
I mean, on a personal level, I think everyone's been under a huge amount of stress, a huge amount of pressure. And ultimately, one of the things that I'm very grateful for is the very science that we track on, is that I understand so much about how stress is affecting my body. I understand how my cycle also affects when I'm going to feel most vulnerable and when I'm going to feel best and worst. It sounds like I'm being, like an evangelist for it, but genuinely that knowledge completely transformed, I think, my experience and understanding of, especially in confinement when we're being starved. And I was in confinement on my own as well, because I last year was writing the book, and I was really aware of the lack of oxytocin and the lack of social hormones that I was getting just from being around other people. And so was, really conscious to make sure that I was protecting myself where possible, and also just being very mindful that I knew I was going to slip into certain lows at certain points. So I've been okay. I've definitely had some highs and lows, as everyone has. I think it's really highlighted to me, and this has just been apparent in both the technology from an app perspective and the book, the importance that this has placed on our understanding of our health and well-being from the perspective of what we need to know about the basics of our biology to help us better understand the vulnerabilities of our body, not just in our connectivity between body and mind and the fact that they are one, but also around stress. And I really, it's been a really hard slog actually getting people to understand that from a funding, the technology perspective, get people to understand there's so much more to women's hormones than just how to get pregnant or how to avoid it. And I think what has been paramount in, the mental health crisis back of COVID is the realization that hormones have such a big part to play.
Absolutely. And it's like what you were talking about there, that kind of being by yourself in those periods too. Because I live by myself, so it was an interesting journey over the past kind of little bit of time with lockdown. But I think because I'd been through the stuff I've been through before, it kind of made the whole thing easy for me, because it's like, definitely worse stuff has happened. But again, because I understand my body more, I understand I'm listening to it more, I'm understanding it more, I was able to give it what it needed more. And that really, really helped. Like you're saying, that connection between the mind and body and hormones, it's all linked, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I think this is what, there's a lot of conversation about very technical language at the moment. And, ultimately a lot of doctors, very important, being in a very important space in terms of publicly speaking about both neuroscience and also endocrinology, which is hormone science, and obviously immunity, I think what hopefully we meet in the middle, where we have, you know, we can make the academic language more colloquial, which is actually one of the things, like, you know, the reasons for writing the book, which I'd always had imposter syndrome about doing because I'm not a doctor, but I work with a lot of doctors, not just in endocrinology, but also in psychology, in general practice.
Yeah.
And what I really wanted to try and do was just make some of the language a bit easier to use,
Yes.
and easier to understand, because that was what was transformative for me and my experience. It was transformative to be able to actually have a, you know, a new set of words to describe phases of my month, phases of stress, but also to be able to articulate stress as something over and above just something I was feeling, the chemical reality of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that I hope now there's a lot more of that happening as well, the kind of colloquial ability for us to understand our bodies.
Yeah, and I think it's a great book. It's brilliantly timed, and I think it's going to be great for so many women at different stages. So tell me about your story. So what I know of it is that one day your period stopped, and it was basically discovered that you had hormonal burnout. Like, can you tell me more about that journey and how you started to understand your hormones?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just really important to caveat this on what we know within the world right now is that so much of this stuff is under researched. And so there's a lot of people that will dismiss, you know, hormonal burnout isn't dismissed, but there's a lot of discussion around adrenal fatigue, which is often a categorization used. Doctors really don't like this category. And I can kind of understand why, because in a medical context, it's not quite right. And they like to use the right language. But I think when we think about our adrenal glands and how overworked they are because we live in an overstimulated environment, it makes sense actually to talk about them as being fatigued, because essentially what's happening is when you're fatigued and you're overworked, what's happening for glands as well is if they're overproducing the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline, which are very important hormones and often very good for us, but overstimulation creates a knock-on effect to all the other cycles that we have, from sleep to metabolism to menstruation. And so, you know, what I was learning was not only was I going through something that was essentially triggered by stress, which, you know, when your period stopped, that's almost the kind of final straw. Your body's really going, absolutely no way. You've ignored all the other signs and symptoms that I've tried to show you, from not being able to get out of bed in the morning and then just ignoring me and getting Ubers to the station, even though you couldn't even walk to the station. Should have been a sign. Ignored that. You know, weight gain, but also and I know you can kind of relate to this as well in terms of exercise, doing the wrong exercise for my body, because I was in a stress state. And then what I was doing, because that's what the world told me to do, was go running and do high impact, because, you know, you can work it out of you. And actually, all I was doing was compounding the problem of more adrenaline, more cortisol. And what I needed to do was lay down, stop drinking coffee. This is incredibly, like, but boiling it down very rudimentarily, but essentially doing the opposite of high impact push and actually start to take more time to be restful. But what I realized was we've designed an entire world where rest is a privilege and a luxury and something that we are not conditioned to accept as important for ourselves, and especially as women. And yet our entire menstrual cycle is designed around high impact energy in the first half versus rest in the other half, and yet we don't think about our lives like that, because we've been essentially conditioned to go into the world around this idea: you get up every day, you perform in exactly the same way, you go to sleep and you get up again. And that's not how our bodies work, that's not how rhythms work. And for women particularly, who operate not around a daily testosterone cycle, which is men's cycles, but around these 4 phases of our menstrual cycle as a menstruating person, why is it that we've built this whole world of stress where we don't even understand the baseline of when in our healthy bodies to pull and push ourselves, let alone when we're kind of oversaturated and full of stress hormones? So my burnout was not new. Most people actually in an epidemic of stress, you know, most people are burning out. But what I found really interesting was just the lack of knowledge. The reason I burnt out was I built a business in my 20s, which was very successful. And I'd been traveling all over the world. And I was like, hang on, I've been told that success is how I get past my biology. But actually all that it did was make me realize, oh, I am absolutely not infallible. And I have been not taking care of myself. And we're told, you know, this was in you know, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, sorry, and 2011 was when I started the business, and burnout hit in 2016. You know, at that point in time, you have to remember wellness was happening, but it was all around pushing yourself. That there was no discussion of, you know, rest, meditation wasn't even big then. You know, this is all new language that we're starting to realize is important. And at that point, we also now need to understand that hormones play a very, very important rationale for why meditation, all these things which are more low impact, are as important as the stuff when you're wanting to do a marathon or whatever else it is. It's the kind of balance of high and low. So my burnout came from very obvious things in hindsight, but it wasn't an easy diagnosis. So I went to the doctors. A lot of doctors gave me very scary information because it was my period stopping was the symptom. So when that happens, it can be many different things, and they're absolutely right to explore all those options. But when stress is the last thing on their list, below cancer, infertility, you know, the stuff that essentially causes you probably the most amount of stress, and rightly so, it's scary, you get more stressed again. So what I think is really important for people to understand is hormones are something we don't want to be self-diagnosing, but they are important to understand our mental physical health, and they are important to a lot of the why wellness and this well-being kind of reality is important for us to involve in our daily lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I relate so much to everything you said there, in terms of I have had that point where I didn't have a hormonal burnout. There were other things that were happening to me. So like when you're talking about like how hormones affect your metabolism, I literally gained weight. I remember there was just 1 month and I just piled it on. The stress and what stress did to my body. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think, I couldn't remember anything. My memory was shot to pieces because I wasn't sleeping. And it was just, I have a Fitbit, and my Fitbit, how high my resting heart rate was insane. It went from being, my resting heart rate was like, it would go from 58 to 63, because it was like at that point in terms of fitness, everything else, that's a really good level to be at. And then when everything like kind of happened, I remember the day that the first kind of person was taken into hospital at the beginning of that kind of grief cycle, I'll call it, or grief kind of, I suppose, moment. My heart rate, just general heart rate, leapt up into the fat burning zone, and it stayed there for 14 hours. For 14 hours, and it was literally something like 130 something beats per minute. And I can go back through my stats now and see over time where it was just my actual just heart rate would just stayed so high for so long, and then my resting heart rate went from being 58 to 63 to being 89, and it was there for ages. And all that did to my hormones, what that did to my body, what that did to my mind, it was just breaking my body down. And it was when I started with my personal trainer Lawrence, that's when he was like, yeah, your hormones are all over the shop, hun. And this is what we're going to do to help you sleep. And no, you're not going to, like you were saying with exercise, you're not going to exercise like this. You do use different energy systems for different things. We're not going to stress your body out, and that whole thing. And that's what kind of got me on that journey of understanding it a little bit more. And it's so important that we know this. But as you said, there's like when it comes to women's health, it's woefully under researched.
It is, and it's under researched and under integrated into education. The fact that we know more about photosynthesis and how a plant takes energy from the sun than we do about how our hormones work is a gross failing on a global scale.
Absolutely.
And you know, exactly what you just said there about sleep. I think, you know, we have been conditioned to almost think about all these different things as separate entities, but our body is rhythmic, and around what we do have as a 24-hour cycle is we're diurnal animals, so we operate well and metabolize in daylight, and then at night our bodies essentially restore, recover. And the reason that our bodies need that time is that, you know, there's a finite chemical balance inside your body that every day needs the energy to operate your brain, your body, your organs. And it is the hormone triggers that allow your body to know how to slip into day to night. And when you're stressed and your brain is awake, because the primal response there is that the adrenaline and cortisol that's coming from what that response is to protect you from the danger around you, and whatever that might be. And so your body's inability to then allow for your pineal gland, which is what releases melatonin, which is what happens when we sleep, is disrupted. But also what happens when we are overly stressed is temperature changes. And what we also know is that the key things for our sleep cycle to kick in properly is light levels. So which is why a lot of shift workers and a lot of people that work through the night, they tend to have a lot of problems with metabolism as well, and then kind of regulating sleep, is because, you know, knowing that it's sundown and knowing a certain point will be when your brain and body start to shift gear and different processes happen to release the hormones that you need for sleep. And if your light levels, if you're consuming loads of blue light, or you're, you know, working outside of those days, or you're just pumped full of adrenaline and cortisol, so you're just zinging, and basically your body isn't regulating temperature, heart rate, or any of the things, or light levels, to be able to know what it needs to do next. So I think it was just this realization of, you know, why is it that it takes getting to the point of burnout or getting to the point of extreme grief and having such a profound impact on our body's inability to operate, that we're learning this? And, you know, some people, in fact, some of the criticism even of things is that, you know, I tend to be quite basic, but I can only really talk to my own experience of realizing I didn't know this information on a basic level. And as a woman, I felt really stupid, and I felt very ashamed, actually, that I didn't know it. But at no point did anyone sit me down and share it with me. And I think that's a common theme, that even if we just take it back to the basics, it's okay if some people are way more advanced. That's good for them to be way more advanced. But a lot of women especially are not, and we're not being given this, and we're only being given it at the point that something's terribly wrong, by which point it can take a long time to actually help your body heal and recover. Because once those chemicals are in your body, they are there, and your body has beautiful systems to flush out, whether it be through crying, sweating, you know, organs like the liver and kidneys. And what we've done is we've not understood those either. So you know, even crying I find bizarre. You know, crying is an incredible way to essentially detoxify stress hormones and release emotion, and yet we've stigmatized it as something that shows weakness. And the first thing often people say when someone's crying is, how can I help you stop crying? And actually what we should be saying is, and some people say obviously let it out, which is very much what we should be encouraging people to do, but we should be encouraging everyone to cry as much as possible. It's very healthy to cry, because it releases the very stress that, especially if you're in grief again, which is what we were coming back to before, it's just really interesting how society has created strange, illogical reference points for things that are very important functionally for our body to be healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's everything that you're saying there. It's about we do need to find a way to help people understand the basics of that. And even things like when it comes to fitness, the only thing I really knew beforehand, just from loving fitness before, I remember it was years and years and years ago, I spoke to, you know, Chloe Madeley. This was way before she kind of is like, I suppose, the fitness for not like kind of has the fitness platform she does now. When she was a PT, I was in contact with her then because I was going to start training with her. And this was actually prior to all this stuff happening to me. And at that point, I was like, okay, like, what can I do? Blah, blah, just like to get on track. And she actually said, oh, sleep and water is like one of the main things that you can do, like for yourself, for your hormones, for your metabolism, etc. And that was the one thing, because that was the end of our conversations, because literally shortly after life changed, I really kept that in my head. And so throughout it, that was the only way I think I got to the point where I wasn't completely burning out. So even though I knew I wasn't sleeping because I had insomnia, I was trying my very best to, and very best to be relaxed. Even if I just lay in my bed in the dark, there were things that I was doing, but it would have been so good to understand more about that. And then my PT actually told me to get those blue light glasses. Also, get off your phone after a certain point. All that kind of basic stuff helped. So I can imagine, like, obviously, with you know, you've got the Moody monthly app as well, which is dope, which I've signed up to. I love it. What is it? How can you like explain it to listeners? And why did you create the app? Because like, how did you get from this has happened to me, here are all these things we don't understand, to I know I'm going to make an app?
I mean, the short story, because we don't have all day, is that I think what I realized was that there was really huge amounts of bias within the world around the experience of health and well-being being designed around this 24-hour cycle and around performance, and everyone getting up every day and doing the same thing and running in this and trying to beat your PB and trying to perform at this high intensity level. And when I found out how women's bodies, or female bodies, I should also say, work, because, you know, we also can talk a little bit about gender here in terms of that in a second. But when we're talking about the female kind of endocrine system and people who menstruate, we're talking about the reality that, you know, the whole wellness industry was designed around this idea of performance. And actually, why do we want to be well? And that is to feel good and be more productive and be, you know, without sounding too cheesy, the best version of ourselves. By performing at this ideal kind of athletic level, we're not doing ourselves a service. And most athletes even use, you know, this hormonal science to train, and yet, you know, we're being prescribed in the kind of wellness consumer space the wrong information about how these things operate, unless we do have nutritionists and personal trainers. So I just found it so wild that the whole world had been designed around this idea of a male experience and around this idea of performance, getting up every day, performing. Because there is some truth to the fact that testosterone cycles for men, it is their metabolism, you know, their sleep cycles, they do operate on much more of a 24-hour cycle. It's not as simple as that. And, you know, this isn't the time to talk about that necessarily, but
yeah.
For me, what I realized was my experience was so baseline, you know, yes, burnout, but there was this whole spectrum that almost every single woman, every single person who menstruates has had an experience where this has come into play, this understanding of change, but having no language around it. So that was one massive realization. And then for me personally, I would, you know, I built this business. The one thing that burnt me out was a hugely successful business in an agency model. And I was working with Nike and I was working with Apple and, you know, all these amazing brands in the kind of early doors fitness, health and well-being space. And I realized that for me, one of the things that knowledge and that experience had taught me was I had the capacity to go and really build technology in this space through my network. And I needed to just do it. Just do it. Oh my gosh, I sound like I'm literally, what's wrong with me? That's hilarious. I'm so indoctrinated. But it was true. I was like, God, I hear this all the time. I need to crack on. So went on and just did it. And then just kind of felt like there was this huge underserved market. I think what my naivety of, cool, okay, I've burnt out, I've learned all this stuff, I need to build technology, you know, the need, the want. But reality was that, you know, most people were way less informed about why it was important. You know, taking brands, you know, periods weren't even talked about. This is 2016, right? So, you know, it's not like now where you open every newspaper and people are talking about, you know, the injustice of how the world has been designed, not without the experience of women. And so technology at that point, people just thought I was mad, I think. I mean, I know that they did. They thought I was absolutely mad. And also we have to take into consideration where periods were talked about from the perspective of technology. It was the incredible innovations that came around fertility or contraception, which are also important aspects. But that's
they're not the only aspects.
They're not the only aspects. So for me, it was about, and what Moody is everyday health and well-being, almost like a weather forecast for your moods and symptoms, connected to what is known science, and also then building a tracking tool which allows women to track their overall health and well-being, help forecast the changes that might be happening across your days, weeks, months, even lifetime, and then recommending well-being, which is designed for those very changes. So mental health, physical health, and nutrition. Because the other thing that I found really interesting was we kind of segmented mind and body into two segments within technology. You've got, you know, mindfulness in one camp and physical fitness in another, which is also quite bonkers
as well, because they're so interlinked.
Exactly. So to me, it was completely obvious. It just took 3 years to get anyone else to think that. So it was a really, in the first phase, it was, you know, honestly, it was really, really hard to get people to understand that this was an important thing to be in the world. And therefore it was really hard to raise money to build it, because, you know, I had the privilege of building a business and exiting before. So I had my own capital, which I did self-fund a lot of it for the first phase. And, you know, I didn't come from that. It was something I built in my 20s. So I was like, cool. What I didn't know was the whole landscape of fundraising, VCs, and then I started to get into that space, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. The reason that this doesn't exist is the people that are funding all the technology in the world are a bunch of white men.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's so difficult to get people on board, and it's like the curse of being an entrepreneur is always thinking in 2030 as well. Exactly. And then waiting for everybody else to get on board with you.
And it does make you do question yourself a lot. And I think what's kept me really consistent with this is just how, if we support 100 people, I would have been, if 100 women didn't have to go through what I went through and knew the knowledge before, I was like, this is cool. But the opportunity here isn't just affecting small groups of people, it's affecting millions of women in this knowledge and this baseline. And that's the intention of Moody, is to just empower women to better understand their biology on a baseline level, with a view that there are so many other experiences that need to be referenced here. Because, you know, Moody was designed, as most technology is designed, around our own experiences, and we bake bias into that. I wanted to build something which helped women not have to only understand burnout when they hit it, but understand tracking their hormones on a daily basis. But, you know, I'm a cisgendered woman, and there are so many other experiences from a hormonal perspective that also need to be better understood. And, you know, this whole series is about gender, and you know, we talk about hormones, which is a very loaded experience anyway, but there are other experiences within this that are important too. You know, you think about the trans community and the reality that no one knows their hormones better than those that are on hormone replacement therapies, and, you know, coming through the depression and experience of being in, you know, essentially in a body that doesn't feel right. And the reality of these important experiences, that's not my experience, and it's not for me to prescribe, but it's important that we start to just open the conversation that there are experiences outside our own that need to be supported by technologies, and that we need to stop thinking about technology as a way to just commoditize data and sell people more stuff, and start to really understand everyday health and well-being, so we can just be more optimal as people.
Absolutely.
And I'm biased, but I think hormones are a very, very important part of unifying mental, physical health for people.
Yeah, I mean, same. I'm biased as well, because I think because we've both been on the other side of that, and it'd be great if other people didn't have to. It'd be great if people didn't have to make that journey, because I'm sure for you as well, it's not fun on the other side of that space. And it's like, and also trying to normalize, in air quotes, normalize again and get back to that. It's not even a short, it's a long journey too. It took so many years for me for my insomnia to go, and for my body to sort itself out, and also having to do things like go on really specific kind of like diets, had to change my nutrition, had to change all these things just to shift back to my baseline normality. And that was really hard work as well. So it would have been great to know some of these things beforehand, so I could just essentially, just as a part of self-care, I feel like this is like an essential part of self-care, understanding this about yourself. And you made a really good point there. It's like people who are trans and going through that, I suppose, hormone replacement therapies and everything else, and also like women who are going through the menopause and everything, there's all these different things, and people have all these questions, and then they have to go to a GP or a doctor, which is, again, at the moment, mainly men, not really understanding everything in an area that's under researched. It can be a lot. So it would be good for people to feel like an element of, I don't know, not control, participation in their health.
Exactly. And it's this reality that it's really intimidating. Like, this stuff is really intimidating. It's scary. And it's also really scary for people to talk about it publicly, because, you know, we don't want to get stuff wrong, and we don't want to be wrong. So we prefer to just say, actually, I don't know. So can the doctor tell me? But the reality is that, you know, whoever you are, if you're experiencing something that's abnormal, the first thing to do is identify that if you think it's abnormal, then it's abnormal. But it's about repetition and pattern recognition. So if you go to your doctor and you say, I experienced this once, they're going to tell you to go away and track it. And that was the other thing about creating tracking technology that felt safe and talked to an audience. Like, a lot of health tracking is, again, either designed around performance and fitness, or it's designed around this idea of, you know, tracking heart rate and reporting back to you, whereas it's not really designed with this kind of conversation around a female. For us, it was this kind of, you know, a woman talking to a woman and then tracking and understanding, so that when you do then go back to your doctor 3 months later with more information, you can say, no, this is exactly when it's happening. This is what phase in my cycle. This is my cycles previously were regular. Now they're irregular. This is what time of year those irregularities started. And just feeling like you go into the room with feeling prepared and feeling enabled by that information, because really knowledge is power in this, but we have spent so much time dismissing ourselves and our experiences because we haven't been given that information or the confidence to articulate it properly.
And that's a really good point there. I didn't even think about that. The ability it will give you to advocate for yourself when you need to, and particularly we actually have a show coming up talking about gender inequalities in health, and how so much of women's health is not looked into, absence from medical trials, and obviously the main focus being on men's health for centuries. We're going to be talking about that, and then actually having this information, how it allows you to go in and be prepared. And particularly as a Black woman, I know that when I go to doctors, I'm like, I'm not leaving until you look at this properly, or I will go to the paper and kick up, I'll burn this whole building down unless you see me properly. I have to kind of go to extremes to get someone to pay attention to me. So to be able to have something even clearer to be able to present to people and say, well, let me open up the folder and show them, I think that's such an empowering tool.
100%. And you said it exactly right there. It's like, we're not just dealing with gender bias, we're dealing with racial bias as well. And the reality, it was actually, there's an amazing book, I'm sure you may have read it, by Dr. Angela Saini, called Inferior. And it's more about gender specific bias within science. And actually, even she talks about how hormones were originally, understood and created, which is in the early 20th century, to prove masculinity as dominance, because testosterone made you strong and estrogen made you emotional, right? So if you just unpack that, we start to realize, and then you think about how almost this science was used to reinforce the very systematic bias of our experiences. And then when you again think about the reality that was detrimental to women, but when you then think about the systemic racism that's been integrated into that too, you really start to understand that these systems are not things that we can just accept as being able to walk into a doctor's surgery. It's like, it's not been set up for the success of people. It's been set up for a success of a very few and limited amount of people, and then everyone else feels intimidated at various levels. And I think that was one of the important things also in the book. Again, it's not my experience, but I wanted to interview women that it was their experience. And, Sashan Farron-Joseph, who has an amazing platform called The Womb Room, she and her experience of having both PCOS and endometriosis, and, as a Black woman being dismissed so often in pain, and being dismissed so often in something that in white women, endometriosis affects 1 in 10, in Black women it's 1 in 3, and yet it's so often this thing of, oh well, it's ignored, or it's then diagnosed late. And it brings me so much, like, that anger you can turn into something. But I think, again, it's exactly as you said, it's about saying this isn't fair and it's not okay, and how can we start to give people the language and the tools wherever they need to at least feel prepared. It really is unbelievable. And it's actually one of the things that I hope is beginning to be more apparent to the doctors, because there's also a bit of a divide between doctors saying that this technology, which often isn't produced by doctors, but it's designed with doctors, certainly what we designed, but then certain general practitioners, dependent on who your doctors are, saying, oh, but now doctors starting to realize that actually these things and these tools can be supportive and actually can help with the very bias that has existed, and they're not the only ones trying to solve these problems. Like, there are things out there that can be supportive.
Absolutely. And I mean, my younger sister, she starts her medical degree, and so does one of my young cousins. They start their medical degree in September, and they both want to be doctors. And when my dad was going around doing all the different tools with them, he was like, it's brilliant, I love doing the tools. He was like, there was like 85% women in or girls at that point, because they were in sixth form, girls in all of these kind of things, in every medical school they went to, in every course. And he was like, the future of medicine is female. And that's great. That's going to change everything for women. This makes me really excited. And it's so good that there are things like Moody app and all these other apps, all these other things that are gathering your information, allowing you to understand your body, that will hopefully make that an easier transition until all the male doctors are thrown away. No, I'm joking. Until there are until there are more female doctors and female identifying doctors that understand what's happening in our bodies.
The other thing that's really important about women going into these spaces and you know, a much more kind of diverse spectrum of women is safety in seeing yourself, but also in technology. It's really, really important to also, I think, for a lot of people to understand that there are technologies out there that are selling data, and it's not a safe space for you to always share. And I do think it's also really important for people to understand that, you know, all the female founders that have founded things that in this space are really doing a lot of work around data protection and making sure that data is never sold. And
that's good.
This is about building safe spaces for people to share what they're feeling and what they're tracking, without the business model being, you know, selling your data to Unilever or brands to be able to work out when you're most likely to buy their products. This is about saying, we will recommend well-being and health. There has to be a business model to keep technology going. It's like, if there is no clear business model in an app or whatever technology you're using, know outright that what their business model is your data. So if you can't work out, you know, and Instagram is the best example, right? Everyone knows that the way that Instagram works is high algorithms for advertising. But in any product that you're using that doesn't have a clear business model or route, always question where that data is going, and make sure that you know, I say this from my own perspective, some people really don't care, but I do think it's an important factor for kind of protecting women's health more broadly in the future as well.
That's a good point. Thank you for sharing that. So you've just released Moody, a 21st Century Hormone Guide, and it's had praise from doctors, specialists, and lots of women. It's a great book. Who should buy this book? Who would benefit most from it?
So it's written from my experience, and it's very central to this around what was the science that I didn't know that completely transformed my understanding of happiness, productivity, sex, relationships, who I go out with, why. You know, the science really did change my life for the better. And you know, I have to say, you know, I'm a cisgendered woman. I think it's designed for cisgendered women, and people who menstruate potentially might get some value, but I think certainly as a kind of focal point. But I think it's really important to also state that, you know, this is why I think there's even more importance around more of these books being written about experiences, you know, from different points of view, not because the only people that can write books about science have to be doctors, but because lived experience and sharing experiences is really, really core to highlighting the areas of science that are under research. So, you know, a lot of what's come out of the discussions around hormonal health and even the work that Moody does is saying, okay, how do we create better facilities to research these things that don't rely on money from pharmaceuticals? Because the reason that women's hormones from a cisgendered perspective are so well researched is around the contraceptive. So the contraceptive and HRT, or hormone replacement therapy for menopause, these are multi-billion-dollar industries. And so we also need to research things that might not have a pill at the end. So you know, one of the big challenges, if you track back a lot of research and where it comes from, is that there is a pharmaceutical end, whereas because you can't cure hormonal burnout with a pill, this is often one of the reasons that it's so under researched, because all these things are business models. So if we're going to try and really, really break through in terms of mental physical health research, we need to start to think of other ways to fund the research that doesn't rely on pharma.
And I think a lot of people don't think about the link between capitalism and health outside of the model in the US or other countries where medicine is paid for. They don't think about it, and it exists here as well.
100%. And I'm a huge believer in pharmaceuticals. I'm not anti-pharma. I think, you know, it's really important that we have these incredible drugs to help. You know, they've changed the human experience for the better in the majority of cases, but it's about choice. And I think the problem is that even within, take the contraceptive, for example, the only drug we take just because, and it's a very powerful drug, we don't take it on the basis of any blood work or saliva tests. We just take whatever our doctor gives us. Taking synthetic hormones, progesterone, always just changes your mind and your body. Like, just think about how much it changes across your cycle anyway. So I think what also needs to happen is just people better understanding what to ask for and what to push back on, so that we don't rely on pharmaceuticals to be the only kind of answer, especially in environments that actually, thinking about stress, anxiety disorders, you know, where there are things that we can do in our everyday health and well-being to support ourselves, but we just need better research as to what are the best things for all kinds of bodies, rather than again trying to homogenize everything into, well, this is for men or this is for women. It's like, that's not the experience of humans. There's so many more nuances. So my point there, sorry, is that you know, the pharmaceutical industry plays a very, very important role in chronic illness, but chronic illness isn't the only kind of illness, and preventative health and the future of preventative health can be a very empowering and very big future, and technology can play a role in that. But it needs to happen now, and it is happening, but we need to accelerate that by everybody getting on board with educating themselves about how their bodies work.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that is going to come out of this period of time that we've been in is that need for people to start understanding more. And I mean, obviously it's been a shaky time, it's been a crazy time, it's not everyone is having the same experience, but I think that the benefits are, one, we know who is running the country and what the different MPs' jobs are, and also we are starting to understand that we personally also need to find out information, how it affects us, and obviously identify fake information, all that kind of fun stuff. But hopefully going forward, people will understand that, particularly when it comes to health, because this year so much of it has been, it's basically the whole thing is about health, and it's making people start to look at themselves and how their bodies and minds have changed during this period of time. And I'm with you on pharma. It's just be nice if they were just like a little bit less trash about doing the work they did.
I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not like, you know,
I know you're not, but it's just that thing where it's like, I believe in it as well. And I'm say to people, I believe in it. It's like, I just wish they were less trash about doing the things they were doing. That's all I want. Then don't need to be patents on things. It's fine.
100%. But that's an episode. I mean, it's it's the reality. And you know, I think you don't have to. The problem is we polarize everything. It's like you're either pro pharma or you're against it. You're either in wellness and therefore you've gone full only eating organic, you know, veganism. Like we don't have to live in these polarities. Like there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum, and there's a happy medium in the middle where we can just go, I am asking the right questions to help myself be the best version of me, and this is the information that I want to learn about and I want to understand, and therefore the experts that I choose to surround myself with are the people that are best for my mind and body, because I've done the work on understanding myself. And that's really all we can ask. But this idea that the whole world is split into very extreme camps is also quite overwhelming, I think, at times. And so I hope that we find a very nice middle ground where we can all communicate a bit better.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more on that. And what facts about hormones are people most surprised by when they realize, oh, like you've got this app, oh, you've written this book? What kind of, I don't know, are there any kind of hormone facts that you like to drop on people to surprise them?
Well, the first thing is happiness is hormonal. So the fact that stress and happiness are chemical responses, not just emotional things. So I think that is just foundational to our understanding of what connects our mental physical health as well. And that idea that when you start to realize that hormones are so much more than why we bleed, why we ovulate, and, you know, why we sleep. I think the other thing that was really fascinating, this is just me, is sex and relationships and how our hormones over time change. Falling in love is probably the most, you know, intense hormonal experience. Everything's new, everything's fascinating, and dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, you're getting that from not just the newness of the relationship, but also sex and all the things that come with a new relationship. And then also the reality that, you know, across the 4 phases of our monthly cycle, let alone across our life cycles from puberty to menopause, sex and our experience of sex changes based on our you know, growing up as a person, you know, experiences change. And actually it comes down to this reality that your body has these chemical reactions, but also you learn that actually that changes. Even the types of people, when I became single for the first time, realizing that when I had a one night stand, for example, which I'd never had in my life until I was 30, which is very late in the day, I realized, because I was also in the research phase of some of this stuff, that you know, I had this one night stand and it was in my luteal phase of my cycle. And I was definitely, again, was like, oh my God, I think really I like this guy. I did not like this guy. It was just, I was in a vulnerable point in my
time. Yeah, you had a good time and you were
time.
feeling a bit,
And I was feeling a bit vulnerable. And but
Yeah.
I didn't know, and I suddenly realized, I was like, you know, if I'd have slept with this guy like 3 weeks earlier in my like kind of rise phase, when I was like, my estrogen was up and I was feeling a lot more confident, I would not have thought about him again the next day in the same way. And I was like, wow, if we start to understand the implications of these experiences in terms of how we're operating and what's important to just give yourself a break and not feel so much guilt, think what women could do in the world. I mean, literally unstoppable superpowers. So I think the main thing is being able to tune into understanding that hormones and the understanding that can reduce the amount of guilt you feel about just the processes that are happening to you on a daily basis. Not that hormones are implicating in everything, but they are a factor. And that happiness, you know, love, sex, all these things are just very powerful chemical reactions. And by understanding them, we can embrace them properly.
Yeah, I love that.
I would say.
Yeah. And we touched on it on men very lightly earlier. Do men also get moody because of hormones?
Of course.
Yeah.
So this is the craziest thing, that actually women's hormones are incredibly well researched because of, as I said, the contraceptive and HRT. You know, what men's hormones are often, the research is very focused on the physical attributes of testosterone, you know, the kind of how strength, but also, you know, erectile dysfunction and hair loss, which again feeds very neatly into pharmaceutical research. But men's mental health, really under-researched in relation to hormones, actually. And, you know, if you think about it, women's hormones are very denoted by their fertility cycles to a certain extent of, you know, you stop being able to have kids and therefore you're menopausal. But men's testosterone depletes at 45. So women often start to experience changes in estrogen around 45 or potentially younger, but 45 tends to be an average benchmark. Men, almost exactly the same mark or a few years later, have a decline in testosterone. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that if your hormones change, and anyone that's taken the contraceptive will know this too, when your hormones change, it has an impact on your emotional, physical health. So when we're talking about, you know, men having midlife crisis at 45 and, you know, going off the rails, their hormones are changing, but no one's bothered to research it. They've just gone, oh, men have midlife crisis and women have menopause, and you're like, cool, glad that we've got that straight and just left it at that and didn't think to do any more. So I think, you know, again, it's because you don't cure it with a medical solution. And I think there is a big piece with this, with male hormone cycles, that probably does need a huge amount of focus. But I think for now, my work and what I really believe is helping women unlock the science so they can use it a bit more functionally in their everyday lives. Because if the science has been there and researched and done by pharmaceuticals to make money for women, why not women start to use the science to just be more optimal and change the world? So that really is where I think we start.
I love that. Awesome. So to wrap up, I've got 2 more questions. So the first one is, you say there is a secret inside you which, once you understand it fully, has the capacity to unlock untold potential. Once you learn the science of your hormones, you will be able to harness it forever. I love that so much. What's one of the advantages and things that you could unlock knowing about your hormones? What's like a really cool thing I can do by knowing more about my hormones?
I think for me, it's productivity. Happiness and productivity. So 2 things that we seemingly strive for in life endlessly, but struggle with, I think. And you know, when you start to realize that the way that your body works has an effect on your productivity, your energy levels, your ability to show up in the world optimally every day, you start to also then not push yourself endlessly to try and be more productive when your body is telling you to chill. So productivity, by tuning in to when to pull push and understanding why resting and taking downtime is as good for your body as pushing it, and when to do that. And then for me, it's happiness. You know, like when you start to understand this stuff, you start to realize that happiness and you know, no one sits in a happiness state. We don't live in a euphoric experience of life where everything's just magical and shiny and full of daisies every day. In equal measure to happiness, sadness is important too. But when you understand that sadness, stress are chemical and happiness is chemical, you understand that having a balance of all these things helps your body overcome. So when sadness becomes too much or overwhelming and burns us out, it's because we're not doing anything to evoke joy, because we're told to sit and be sad, or we're told to just try and pretend we're not sad. And it's like, we just need to understand that there's a balance at play. And genuinely for me, the transformation was realizing that it was chemical. And we talk a lot about the extremes with depression being chemical, and now that's starting to land with people, but so is just everyday existence. Like, you turn up every day and all those chemicals are still inside your body. If you are suffering from clinical depression, then it's because your chemical balances are off. And I think it's going to help the future world to really understand mental illness and mental health in a completely different light as well.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Okay. And then last one, what myths would you like to bust about hormones? What is there something that people believe and you're like, this isn't true?
The fact that your hormones essentially are designed around this idea you get up every day and they just reset. And they're the same. You know, the reality is that all these environmental factors affect how your hormones operate. And I think the fact that most people understand that there is estrogen for women and testosterone for men, and the idea that, you know, we're all a chemical balance of all these different things. And, you know, especially when it comes to, and exactly as your series and theme is around gender, it's like there's a spectrum. Everyone's chemical balance is different, but it doesn't make you more female or male. It just means that you need to understand what your pattern is, and therefore how you understand your pattern to get the best from the happy hormones that you need to evoke. And whatever it is you need to do to be able to rhythmically tune into that is spending some time understanding what's working, what's not working, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, and tracking it. And again, I'm biased in this, but there's a lot more things you can do if you hit extremes with blood work and all that other kind of biometric data. But just coming back to the basics of, we're all on a spectrum of hormones as well. And you are the best person to understand how to best tune in and best track it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Amy. Where can we find everything online? That app, the book, you, Moody Instagram page, where can we find everything?
So Moody is Moody Month. So the Instagram, Twitter, everything is Moody Month. Same with the web platform. And if you go onto the web platform or the Instagram, you'll be able to download the app from both iOS App Store and Google Play Store. The book is available wherever you buy books, and it's available on Amazon as an audiobook as well, which is great. So yeah, everything is Moody Month, and the book is Moody, a 21st Century Hormone Guide. So, you know, I would just, whatever people are into, I would always encourage everyone to just work out if it fits for you and give it a go.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Amy, and I hope you have an awesome day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Speak On. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, co-workers, strangers in the street. To find out more about us, including our upcoming events, head over to Instagram, instagram.com/speakon_. Bye!